Good morning, church. Annalise, thank you very much for that item. It was a lovely change from the story. Shabbat Shalom. It is a greeting, as Russ said before, and it's one where if I said it to you on Sabbath, you would respond back with Shabbat Shalom. And as was mentioned, it means literally Sabbath peace. It's pretty tough because at the moment, especially where the Hebrew language comes from, there's obviously a lot of unrest, not a lot of peace going on at the moment. But we came up with the topic well before that ever occurred, and I think it's even more meaningful at the moment when we talk about it. I'm going to get straight into it. We're talking about the gospel according to Jesus, and today, obviously, we're talking about Sabbath and peace. Last week, Nathan opened up with talking about salvation, and I want to start with a verse this morning. There's a few verses if you have your Bibles today, if you still carry them, or open up something, at least pretend like you're looking at the Bible. Leviticus 23:3, and it says, "There are 6 days when you may work, but the seventh is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work wherever you live. It is a Sabbath to the Lord." When you're younger, how do you perceive Sabbath? When you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way through the teen years, probably, when you hear it's Sabbath, if you're anything like me, it seemed like a little bit of a bore. It was a little bit tedious when you were a kid. You got to Sabbath and you pulled out the list of all the things you couldn't do. That's what Sabbath felt like. And I know for some of us today, it still feels like that. A lot of us here are Adventists. You're here on Saturday, so you have some knowledge that we worship on the seventh day here, and we call it Sabbath. Why? Rather than go into all the depths of it today, we're trying to look at what are some of the advantages that we get from worshiping on Sabbath. I remember, as I said, growing up as a kid, you couldn't swim on Sabbath unless it was a baptism, so we all wanted to be baptized every Sabbath afternoon during summer. We couldn't ride our bikes, my brother and I couldn't ride our bikes unless, Lincoln, we were doing what? Can you remember? That's exactly right. If we were visiting old people, we were allowed to ride our bikes to visit them. So Lincoln and I, every week, were like, let's go visit old people. So if you see me arriving to your place on Sabbath, you know exactly what I think about you. We had all of these different things, and, Lincoln and I knew it was Sabbath because we would actually get dressed in identical clothes every Sabbath. We had matching safari suits, we had matching jumpers, shirts, you name it. We're not twins. Most people think we're adopted, but we would be dressed identically. And all of these little traditions you would have growing up as a young person when it came to Sabbath perished the year. Oh my goodness. It didn't get worse than when you looked at the calendar and you realized that your birthday landed on a Sabbath. No presents. We had to wait until the sun was set that evening to get our box of Lego. We wouldn't have a party that day. We'd have to wait. And what if one of our heathen friends, those who didn't worship on Sabbath, they had a birthday party? Well, we couldn't go. And then our friends started going go-kart racing and other things on Sabbath, and we were told, no, you can't go because it is Sabbath. And all of a sudden, Sabbath was set up as a day that you wanted to avoid at all costs. Parents seemed to love it. Mum and Dad loved Sabbath. They'd get to Friday night going, this is awesome. They would go and have their sleep in the afternoon. Hope so. And they would rest, and we would get home from church, and we would have people over for lunch, and they just loved it. It was genuinely a wonderful time for them. We would be sent to our rooms, and we would have to read a book, a Sabbath book, of course, one that was bought from the ABC, nowhere else. and we would read, and we would sit there, bored. Until eventually we broke them down enough that we were able to play Lego as long as it was Bible Lego, so we were building things to do with the Bible. So we got very creative on all the different things you could sort of put into the Bible somewhere. I mean, this pirate ship, he is worshipping, on Sabbath here, and he is ministering to those other people in, with the guns over, and you would get very creative as kids. I remember, as I said, we would have really close friends, and they would have parties or they would do things on Sabbath, and we were told we just couldn't go. And I remember even, you would say to Mum and Dad, but can't we go, even if it's just so we can say grace for them? Our time is really structured based on what? When you think of a day, a month, and a year, what are those things based off? Why do we have 24 hours? A whole day is based on what? Rotation of the earth. And a month, the same. It's all solar. A year, it's how long it takes us to get around the sun. All these different things are set up. The one thing in time that we don't have that is based on the solar system is a week. A 7-day week. We know why. It was put in there pretty early on to us. If we go back to the beginning, Nathan said last week that there are 2 verses that most people here would probably know. Can you remember what they were? Jesus wept and John 3:16. I would like to add one more as we go through this series. Genesis 1:1. There is a good chance you all know how it starts, don't you? The first word is in, and we know it. This is where I want to take us back to for Sabbath, because it is not about the 10 Commandments. Sabbath starts in Genesis. Specifically, we go to Genesis 2:2. And it says, by the 7th day, God had finished all the work he'd been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all of his work. And God blessed the 7th day, and he made it holy. Because he rested on this from all the work of creating that he'd been doing. The word rested, I've bolded there because in the original Hebrew, I didn't go to Avondale, but I can Google. The original Hebrew there is used one other place in the Bible, which is in Joshua. And it is translated to cease or to stop. He was talking about manna coming from heaven. To cease or to stop. So you'd actually read that more accurately. So on the 7th day, he stopped. God doesn't really need to rest. He's God. He was able to just speak and things were formed. But what he did do was stop. It's something I think we are losing from our Sabbath. The ability to cease. And look, I'm 2 minds here. I'll try and get up some weeks and encourage you to do more on Sabbath so that some other people can do less. And you'll be asked very soon to do things for your church, and they'll probably involve Sabbath work for you. So I am torn. But I genuinely believe we need to remember how to cease and to stop when we get to Sabbath. You may have heard from the story, we just got back from Thailand. Thank you very much for that story, whoever did it. That was just a hoot. And some of you will pay dearly later. But we did just get back from Thailand. It was a trip that had been years in the making because we were meant to go away with the kids in COVID, and that all got cancelled, and they were all upset, and upset kids are never fun. You weren't that upset. And so we decided to go to Thailand with some friends. And the thing is, what do you do when you're away for 9 days? With 2 kids, we pack it full of things. We got back from the holiday, and the first thing somebody says to you, how do you feel? It was good to get away. I'm like, what do you need? You need a holiday from your holiday. We live in a world where we cram every single thing we can into every single moment that we have. Even our holidays now have started taking on the feeling of exhaustion by the time you get home. It was fun while you were there, but you get home and go, I need a break. Like, seriously, I need a break. We, I guess talking about kids too, for those of you who have kids and have gone through school, it seems like the more we get through this world, the more and more extra things we start throwing on them. So for me, in my really early 40s, when we were going to school, the number of extracurricular activities that we had amounted to, that was 0. That's right, 0. We chose at one point during high school to start up tennis, my brother and I, which was just down the road from BAC, literally on the same street, so it was a few-minute walk, and that was it. Then as we got to late high school, we did D&V and things like that, but it wasn't an every week, every day thing. I now look at our kids, and from the age of 8, even younger, we're packing in so many different activities in an afternoon. Almost every single afternoon has something on for one of them. And we want to know why it's hard to teach our kids to just stop, to be still, to cease, to have Shabbat. To have that peace on a Sabbath day, it is one of the biggest gifts we were ever given. And we as a church, of all churches around the place, along with Jews and Seventh-day Baptists and other ones, have hooked on to this gift. Back in the 90s, there was a band that none of you would have heard of called Bon Jovi. If you've heard of them, then I had to Google them. But they had a song back in the 90s out of interest, which was, "I'll sleep when I am dead." That's how they felt in the 90s, that their life, and you read up the story, John Bon Jovi wrote about this particular song, and he said, we were feeling so much pressure that every single person wanted something from us. We never had any time to just enjoy. He said we were famous, we were rich, we were all these different things, but it didn't mean anything to us because we had no time for it. And he came up with the song of "I'll sleep when I'm dead," and just going, that is about the feeling we have of when we're going to have a break. Who feels like that even when you get to Sabbath these days? Are you exhausted? I know some of you are because you're sleeping right now. And it's true, isn't it? You sit in a slightly dimmed room, little aircon going, the melodic tone of somebody's voice, and you start drifting. And yet we get to Sabbath and so many of us are so busy. You think about all the jobs that just occurred this morning just for you to sit here. All the people who cleaned through this week, or this morning set up chairs, or who might be cooking or serving you at the cafe, or running Sabbath school classes, or staying up till all hours to do a sermon, whatever it may be, there will be people who have put a lot of time in so that you can hopefully sit and be still. We push in every aspect of our life. I was reading the Washington Post, and this was a good one. 88% of people, statistics are great because you can manipulate them, but this was pretty clear. 88% of people use their phones while on the toilet. The Post went on to say there are two people in this world, somebody who will admit it and the liars. That is a crazy world that we've gotten to, where 88% of respondents, that was 10,000 people they surveyed for that one, 10,000 people, 88% of people use their phones on the toilet to scroll. News and social media were the two things. We can't even get into a car these days typically and just have silence because it is a waste of time. I could be making a phone call, I could be listening to a podcast, I can be listening to some music, I can be doing something in my life other than just the sweet sound of silence. And that is why we have Sabbath. Worldly success, you often hear people say, well, I'll slow down once I've gotten somewhere, or once I've achieved, or, high school, all the high school students are going to be flat out at the moment studying, getting ready for their Year 12 exams. And I suspect if you're like me, you think in the back of your head, I'll be able to slow down once this is over. And then all of a sudden you hit uni and go, oh, okay, rephrase, I'll slow down after uni. I might take a gap year. And then you finish uni, you get offered a job, and all of a sudden you go, well, I'll slow down when and you always give yourself goals of when you're just going to take a break. Then all of a sudden you find yourself in your mid-40s and go, I haven't had more than 3 weeks off ever. How does that happen? Success, here's a man. Oh, sorry, yeah. Anyway, we were in Thailand. Here is a man, Rupert Murdoch. He's 92, and out of interest, he's the one on the left. His son, Lachlan, is on the right there. Why is he in the news at the moment? Because in the last month, Rupert Murdoch is the head of News Corp, if you've ever heard of them, and if you haven't, you definitely know about them, because they're one of the largest news organisations in the world. He built it up in Australia, in Adelaide, actually buying all the Adelaide newspapers and built up this huge empire. He's worth near on $20 billion, let me say billion dollars. He's 92, and finally this month, he actually said he was going to transition to stepping back from running the business. Here is a man who does not have an off switch. 92. He's got 6 kids. He's been married 4 times, and this year he proposed for the 5th time. And I love the quote that he had in his own newspaper. He said he was pretty certain this would be his last marriage. You reckon? You're 92. How many more do you have in you? Out of interest, they called off the engagement, so never actually did get married this year. But he's going to hand that over to his son Lachlan. If you're Lachlan, what do you see your life ahead now? You've seen your dad at 92 with $20 billion in the bank. And what's he doing? He's going to work every day because it's just what he knows. He's in the rat race. He's just doing it. He's on autopilot, and he still just loves the thrill of work and feeling like you are busy, because we get so much identity out of being busy. The busier we are, the more we feel like we're actually achieving at life. The busier we are, the more you think that you are doing good, either for your family, for your church, for your work, for your whoever. You will be able to talk yourself into being busy. You compare that to one of my favorite places to go. Anyone been here? It's in New York. Yes, Michael, I knew you would have been there. This is a company called B&H, photo video. They've had a few different names through the years, B&H being the initials of the 2 owners. It's been a staple in New York, and it's owned by, and most of the management are very strict Jews. They've become literally one of the biggest, if not the best, photographic and video store in the world. And what is interesting about them is that they are actually shut, it feels like, more than they are open. They shut every Sabbath from sunset to sunset. Not only do they shut their website. You can't buy from the New York sunset to sunset, Friday night to Saturday night. Even if I'm in Australia and I'm sitting there and it's Sunday or Friday and I'm sitting somewhere else in the world and I'm like, I just want to buy something. It's not Sabbath for me. No, you can't buy. They shut for every Jewish holiday, from Passovers to this, that. So last year they were shut for over 90 days of the year. And they are still one of the biggest. And the single number one complaint, if you ever read the forums, is they're always shut. And yet the people still go and buy. And they keep making their money. We get to Friday nights, and I don't know if you're anything like me. Sorry, Damon, you're yawning. You right? Just checking. Just talking about Sabbath rest. Good to see you working so hard. It actually is the perfect time, because I was about to say we get to a Friday night And I am somebody who goes and miraculously, I'm not joking, can go to sleep hours earlier than any other night of the week. I would normally go to bed sometime between 12 and 1 every night. That's my normal, and it has been for 20 years. And for some reason, I can't go to bed much earlier through a week unless I'm really sick or jet lagged. But come Friday night, I'm exhausted, and for whatever reason, my mind can just switch. And it is the biggest blessing in my life. Wow, it is awesome. Because we do get exhausted. How do we spend time, in Sabbath? Obviously, we worship, we come here. Although, did you know that the Bible never says you have to go to church on Sabbath? It says get together, commune, worship, keep it holy, sanctified, set aside, do something different. And we do what? We go out in nature, obviously, again, within reason. You can walk, you can't necessarily ride. You might be able to go into the water, but not if it's got crashing waves, because that's the beach. And if you go to the beach, you probably shouldn't get on any sort of, plank of wood or anything that you might surf on. And we have all these different unique things of what we feel is holy and what we don't. And isn't this exactly what the Jews had in their life? We see the Jews, the Pharisees, the Sadducees as people who were so legalistic. They were so precise about their Sabbath days, but it all came from a really good spot. They didn't just start out going, we want to ruin Sabbath. They actually set up all these rules to try and protect Sabbath. They knew it was such an amazing gift. How can we protect it? So let's put rules up. And if there are rules, no one can break them, and everyone can then keep Sabbath, and we can all be happy. And Jesus had a great time breaking down so many of those rules, didn't he, on Sabbath? It was one of the things he just seemed to love to do. He would always be getting into some kind of debate on a Sabbath. But we know that Jesus worshipped on Sabbath. He went to temple, and it even says, as was his custom. It was something he regularly did. He might have had the odd day out with the disciples and walking, talking, preaching elsewhere, but regularly he went to temple. He would break Jewish Sabbath rules, though. He would walk through the grain fields behind his disciples, who would be doing what? They'd be picking the heads off the grain because they were hungry. They'd get into trouble, and he would defend them, going, it's okay. He would heal on the Sabbath, which was against all Jewish regulation. And he would come back and say, isn't it more lawful to do good on the Sabbath, to be merciful? And he kept telling them what Sabbath should be like. Rather than the rules and regulations, a day where he could talk to his Father. A lot of us have Sabbath traditions. You might light candles. You might have special food. I think I've said in other sermons before, my mum would go down to Perrett's, a Wynnum bakery, every Friday, and we would get a custard tart if we were lucky. And if we'd been really bad, she would buy an apricot pie, which was from Satan himself. And we would hang out for the custard tart, hope that we'd been good enough that week. And we would have these special traditions of what you would do. And you may have some today. We have them because we like to say this is a special day. We want to designate this as different. You might have a different playlist. Bon Jovi gone. Michael W. back in. Whoever it might be. But you might set up things a little bit differently for yourself come Sabbath. Just where did Sabbath, originate from and stuff? Look, as I said, we go way back to the Bible, but here is some pottery that was found talking about Sabbath 600 years before Jesus was even born. I could give you so much history on Sabbath and the fact that it had been kept for such a long period of time, as far back as we can look. It's really quite amazing. And yet the one place we often seem to go when we talk about Sabbath is Exodus. We quite often go to the Ten Commandments because it's a really powerful thing, isn't it? Even though Sabbath was there long before the Ten Commandments, and if you go to Exodus 16, I won't bring it up this morning, if you go to Exodus 16, this is as they're leaving Egypt, what was the one thing they hadn't been able to do for near on 400 years? They hadn't had a Sabbath. They had been forced to work 7 days a week to the bone every single day. So when they came out of Egypt, they had forgotten the gift that was Sabbath. And this is why Jesus came and put these God came and put these reminders in for Sabbath day. He wrote it down for them and he said, you guys have forgotten, but remember, 6 days you've got to do everything. I want you to rest. I'm giving you permission, guilt-free rest. No one is going to whip you if you don't. No one's going to kill you if you stop working on Sabbath. Rest. It was permission rather than a command. Matthew 24, verse 20, Matthew 24, 20, talks about Sabbath keeping 40 years after Jesus had been. And I mean, look, as I said, you could go through verse after verse after verse as to why we still believe Sabbath was relevant, because it continues well into the Bible, into the New Testament. We often think it's an Exodus 20 thing where it was written to the Jews and that's it, but it has continued on well past Jesus' death. Well past. I won't get into the history, but when did Sabbath change from Saturday to Sunday? That was the Council of Laodicea, and that's historically, you Google it later if you want to, the Council of Laodicea, where they met. And again, for sort of good reasons, the empire at the time decided they wanted to make Christians differentiate from the Jews. They wanted to go, hey, we're different. We believe in Jesus, they don't. How do we make this different? Well, we're not going to worship on Saturday anymore. We're going to worship Sunday, because that's a good day. He rose from the dead. Jesus did. That's the root of Christianity, so that's where we're going to go. But it continues on. Acts, I think there's 80 references to Sabbath in Acts, well after Jesus has gone back to heaven. And do you know that with the Ten Commandments, the longest commandment is what? It's not a hard answer. It's the fourth. It's the longest commandment of all 10. Why? And why, well, we always asked as kids when we were growing up, why does it start with the word remember? Why? No other commandment starts with remember not to kill. We know that there'd be consequences and they'd be bad. All of the commandments have consequences that are bad if you don't follow them. My wife tells me there's a very bad consequence with the adultery one. True? Yes, very true. When you look at honoring your father and mother, well, Eloise and Tom, we probably need to talk about that one a little bit more. But there are negative consequences for going against what God has set up for us. And yet, for some reason, we get to the fourth one as a Christian worldwide faith, and we forget. It's like when God said the word remember, he knew we would forget. And you may say, well, I'm here today on Sabbath, so I've remembered. And chances are we've forgotten as well. Why we're here, what the gift is. Because if he said we were going to have to work hard to remember, there's a reason he said it. Most Christians, as you know, around the world, who don't keep seventh-day Sabbath, some of them still keep a Sabbath. And I've been listening to some podcasts lately where some of the Christian guys on these podcasts have actually started keeping over the last few years a Sabbath day. It may be a different day. Some of them keep a Monday because they're busy on Saturdays and Sundays, but it's always a Monday for them. One of the pastors of Gateway Church over in Texas, it's a 100,000 person church. So we're getting close. We're almost there, Springwood. But 100,000 people every week. He has started taking off one day a week, and for him it's a Wednesday. That's his Sabbath day. It's a start. People are at least starting to realize that there is such a huge advantage of just stopping from this world. And yet so many people still just try and do the sneak on Sabbath. I mean, who's that going to hurt? Really, no one. It's between you and God. But I was playing with this Jewish guy in New York, actually. I was playing golf, just in case you didn't pick that up from the story either. And we were having a really good chat, and he found out that I was a Seventh-day Adventist, and we both worshipped on Sabbath. He was a strict Jew, and sunset was a really important thing to him. And he worked out that I had a reasonably good sense of humor, and he said, can I tell you a story? It's like a joke, but can I tell you this story that we tell on Shabbat? And I said, please, I'd love to hear it. And he goes, well, there was this guy, and he started sneaking out on Shabbat to go and play golf. Because no one would know. It was early in the morning. There's this Jewish guy, and he would go out and play golf. And you would never do that, would you, Justin? Never. Sneak out and play golf on Sabbath. And he said it kept happening, and he felt really bad about it to start with, but over time, the more you do it, the less it became something that his conscience would actually remind him of. Until eventually he wasn't going to temple on Shabbat at all, and he was just playing golf. And the story goes that the angels were watching, and the angels turn around to God and go, you need to do something about this. He is just desecrating your day here. Do something. And God says, I have a great idea. Great idea. So the next hole the guy gets to, it's this short par 3 over water, one of the toughest holes on the golf course, and he hits his shot, and miracle by miracle, the ball lands behind the hole, spins back, goes in the hole for a hole in one. The guy is ecstatic. He is jumping for joy. Like, if you're a golfer, a hole in one is the holy grail of golf. It's very rare you ever get one or two, and it goes in the hole. The angels are, what are you meant to be a punishment, God? And God turns around and goes, who's he going to tell? I said to him, that is really a good story. I loved it. It made me giggle as we were playing our round of golf that day, going, the Lord works in mysterious ways. But you're right, who's he going to tell that he's just done something so miraculous? We find Jesus in temple, reading scrolls, doing miracles, all those different things as I mentioned. And the one verse that I really love is Mark 2:27, which you probably all know. It's one that you probably used against your parents growing up if you were smart. And then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. I'm sure you've all thought about it, you've unpacked it a million times in your life before as to what this actually means. Given the context of when Jesus was saying this and what had just been happening. But the essence of this is that God didn't create us just to worship him on the Sabbath day. That is not why you are sitting here. It is the reversal of that. That he created you and gave you a gift. He knew when he created the world, and he rested after humans were made. Humans came first before Sabbath. He created us and then gave us a gift the very next day. When he stopped after the 6 days of creating and breathing out and breathing life into us as humans, he got to the seventh day, and it says he stopped. And some of the Jewish books even said it's like he breathed in. He caught his breath. He had spent 6 days breathing out, speaking everything into existence, physically breathing breath into humans. And then on the Sabbath day, he took a breath. He stopped. He paused. Sabbath was made for us, not the other way around. It is a gift that was there from Eden. And I say that because Eden was perfect. Eden was perfect. Do we understand that? No sin, and yet we still had 1 day out of 7 to sit back and do what? I've been talking to God all week if I'm Adam. I've been chatting to God every single day. I've been out of nature every single day. I've been doing all these things, and yet God still says, just stop for 1 day. I read a line that I really love. It says, it comes down to trust, Sabbath, and what we try and fit in. Can we trust that we can get more done with God in 6 days than we can in 7 without him? Because so often we will think, we need to do that one extra thing. We need to take that one extra job. We need to go out and play that one extra round or watch that footy game or go to a music recital or whatever it may be on Sabbath. But it comes down to trust. Do we trust that God can do everything we need in our lives in those 6 days? Or do we have to do our human 7-day thing? A lot of my friends who are not Christians, not Adventists, definitely don't keep a Sabbath, question how they would actually fit their life in if they had 24 hours less every week. But we're used to it, aren't we? We tithe. You're already giving 10% of everything you get back in and you survive. God will provide, like manna. The other time that word was used was when manna was there. And you think about the Israelites, what happened on Friday? Double the amount of manna, and it didn't go off. And it says in there, and I love this, it says in there that if you kept double on any other day, maggots would come and eat your manna. Maggots, my favorite. That's what would come in. But on Sabbath, on Friday in preparation, it wouldn't happen. He will provide. Finishing up I guess the story I love the most that relates to this idea of peace and Sabbath for me is a really short one. It's only a few lines in the Bible. Jesus is walking along and he's getting to a town and he comes up to a house and there are two ladies there, Mary and Martha. And he goes in and he wants to stop there and sit with them, commune with them, talk with them. And we know the story. Excuse me. Martha goes in there and is all flustered now. Jesus, he's in my house. Cooking, cleaning, prepping, doing everything while Jesus is sitting outside. She's in the kitchen just getting everything ready so it is perfect for him. Mary is doing what at this time? She's sitting at his feet. She is drinking in Jesus. She is absorbing every single ounce of words that come out of his mouth. And when Martha even goes to Jesus and dobs on her sister and says, "Oh, Jesus, can you speak to Mary? She's not listening to me. Can you speak to Mary and tell her to come and help me? I am flat out here." Instead of rebuking Mary, he says to Martha, you don't understand. She knows where she needs to be. She is exactly where she needs to be. She needs to be worshiping with me. That is more important than anything else in the world. It is the essence of what we do here on earth. For me, you struggle with Sabbath in business, how to say no to clients when they need you. You might struggle with different things. I mean, there are some nights I'm praying on a Friday night that one of my friends who are much more heathen than me will text me the Broncos score so I don't have to look it up myself. Or we might, just go, it's only one time. Tay-Tay's only playing here a couple of nights. I need to go and listen. Whatever it might be, you know your poison more than anyone else. I know mine. What's the thing that's going to be used to try and get you away from worshiping God? And I can't tell you what that is, and I don't think any church can tell you that one size fits all. Even across our Adventist faith, you go to South America, North America, you want to worship in London, you want to worship here, what you do and don't do on Sabbath is very different. Out of interest, in South America, you can't go and do the ad repeal on Sabbath. That is wrong to collect money. In Australia, if anyone's ever done it, that would be the day you do it. In London, you might go to church there and go to London Central and potluck lunch, but you'll duck down to Waitrose underneath the church and pick up lunch that I'm sure was pre-purchased to bring upstairs for the potluck lunch. There are so many differences around the world as to what we believe we should and shouldn't do on Sabbath. I'm not here to tell you what is right and wrong. That is no one's job here. Actually, Paul specifically says and talks about not judging other people from their day of worship, not judging them from the food they eat, all these different things. He made it very clear it's not our job. Our job is to work out how we are going to commune with God better, given this gift of the Sabbath day. I have to stop and ask myself, why do I keep Sabbath? Do I need Sabbath peace in my life? Answer is absolutely yes. Do I do it well? Not often. Sometimes for all the right reasons. You might just get smashed on a Sabbath. I mean, how many here, if you help lead in any space, as I said at the start, Sabbath can be some of your busiest days of the week. And you get home and the running joke is Sunday is Sabbath for a lot of people because it's when you actually get to stop. We need to be careful of that. Doing good for those reasons, still not stopping, even though you're doing great things, I still believe is just as wrong as not stopping for other reasons. Is there something, and this is my last question for you, is there something in your life you could change today to experience more of the Sabbath peace that has been gifted to us? That's the question. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for Sabbath. Thank you we're able to be here to commune together, to talk, to laugh, to joke, to know that we are yours. Help us as we go through this week to be, I guess, excellent representatives of you, your word, the gifts that you've given us, and help us to come back here safely one day. And we ask that you be with all of those around the world who are struggling for a variety of reasons this week. Give me a tough week. Be with them all. In your name, amen.